too. Also, why a person may feel happy could be, alright, this is not proper English, but maybe because their end goal is virtue or money. And they feel happy, and they feeling happy is an unintentional byproduct. Also, animals, insects, and plants could also arguably fall under this desire rule, as the Quran and Sunnah indicate they feel emotions too. Mill won't apply it to them because, as said on my first critique, beings desire happiness in ways often irreconcilable with the ways other beings desire happiness. We want to eat animals and build homes at the expense of the well-being of lesser beings, even though one could extend the proof to them. Mill's proof gives priority to humans on the basis of being human, a superiority. If superiority is making humans a special exception to why they can disregard the well-being of lesser beings, and humans can also subject other humans on the basis of superiority as well, finding the human part irrelevant, though true, whilst focusing on other alternative qualities such as a person not having the same skin color or origin or belief as they, and so their qualities make their happiness irrelevant, whilst we ought to, due to our qualities, maximize our own happiness, even at their expense, much like how we do so with lesser beings, which again is due to us having a notion of superiority due to the type of attributes we have. I think that is quite clearly and very, very apparent throughout history that, okay, firstly, all humans, because we're superior, do not regard the well-being of animals and insects and plants on the same level, at the very least, as our own. Even vegans will not do that. Even vegans are gonna still prioritize their happiness, even if it comes at the cost of the life of a plant, as well as its emotional experience. By the way, because the Quran and Sunnah indicate they feel emotions, so I don't think vegans escape the pain-causing problem either. And why am I saying this? Because, well, if we are prioritizing our own happiness and pleasure and so on over these other creatures because they are lesser than us due to their lesser qualities, then this is actually quite natural. But we also find that humans do this in general with each other in like in history. We safeguard or protect or ensure our own happiness at the expense of other human beings' happiness because they are in some way different from us that we find relevant. Even if we acknowledge that the other group is human, if their skin color or their origin or their beliefs differ in a way that we find relevant, well, history attests to the fact that we often will be very willing to subject them to our to subject them to meaning take over them, harm them, kill them, steal from them, and so on, and ensure our own happiness, and completely cause them to suffer. Why am I saying this? Again, it's a problem with Mill's very appeal to inductive universal intuitions, because if he does this consistently, then I could just as equally justify, again, the fact that humans throughout history have prioritized their own interests over other humans, and that's quite universal. It's as universal as us ensuring our own interest over animals' interests, or our own interest over the plants' interests, or over insects' interests. Like we just naturally are like that universally. So if Mill was going to appeal to this universality of intuitions for his utilitarianistic argument, for his utilitarianistic belief, a person can just as easily justify a reverse utilitarianism where everybody pursues their own happiness even when it harms others, because that is also universal. That is also a very, very universal intuition that humans do up until this day. We clearly till now, with animals, especially insects and plants, obviously do this. We are not going to prioritize their life over ours. We are not going to prioritize their pleasure over ours. No, it's never going to be like that. And with other humans, I already mentioned that earlier in another video, or the last video, where, yeah, again, there's still instances where Western countries are doing exactly that, prioritizing their happiness over others. And my whole point of all this is that if you are going to appeal to universal intuitions, you cannot cherry pick. Either you take it all, or you take none of them, and they're all unreliable. Because if I ask Mill, well, why aren't you gonna go with my reverse utilitarianistic rule? He will say some inconsistent nonsense. Like maybe he will say something like, oh, I don't know, like it. I'm not sure what he would say actually, but I would imagine if someone is gonna be a devotee to utilitarianism, and this is his proof that it's universal that we aim for happiness as our end goal. Well, also it's universal that we harm others for our end goal of happiness. So are you gonna just appeal to one universal intuition whilst completely rejecting the reliability of the other? Because if you do that, why don't we just reject the reliability of pursuing happiness as our end goal? Why don't we reject that intuition's reliableness? That it's a reliable intuition in guiding our actions towards what's right and wrong. I mean, if you're going to reject my reverse utility rule, I'd say it's quite obvious that it's just as justified to reject your utility rule, because both utilitarianism and reverse utilitarianism have the exact same type of proof. So if reverse utilitarianism is based on a proof that's unreliable, inductive universal intuitions, then by necessity that would also mean that utilitarianism is based upon a unreliable proof as well, which is inductive universal intuitions. So that's my whole point here, really. You've raised an important critique that touches on several layers of Mill's argument, particularly regarding the relationship between different beings and how happiness is pursued or valued differently among them. Let's break it down. Virtue or money as indirect goals. You make a key observation that happiness may not always be the direct goal, but rather a byproduct of pursuing other ends, such as virtue or material wealth. In Mill's framework, happiness is often equated with pleasure or the absence of pain, but people and beings might pursue other objectives that lead to happiness indirectly. For example, a person may seek virtue not for the sake of happiness, but because they value it as a moral or ethical pursuit. In this case, happiness is an unintended consequence, not the primary goal. This is a critique of Mill's simplification that all human actions can be reduced to the pursuit of pleasure or happiness. Different individuals and cultures may have complex reasons for acting, with happiness being just a side effect of their broader goals. Mill's utilitarianism, by focusing too much on happiness, risks ignoring this complexity. Animals, insects, and plants as potential recipients of happiness. He also touched on a deeper issue, extending the notion of happiness to non-human beings, such as animals, insects, and even plants. The Quran and Sunnah suggest that non-human creatures experience emotions and have some form of consciousness, so it's not a stretch to think that their well-being and happiness might be considered in ethical frameworks. However, Mill's utilitarianism limits its scope to humans based on the premise that only humans can reason and have complex desires. By the way, this is completely false, because in the Quran and the Sunnah, animals, plants, and insects all worship Allah alone. That requires reason. It requires a mind that infers things about reality. In fact, even if you don't believe this, the very fact that an animal or an insect or a plant does things like anything at all, communication, which plants also do, by the way, insects walking around, knowing there's food, this is not food, that's reasoning. They're using their minds. Reasoning is therefore there, no matter which creature you pick on. It's not something that is exclusive to human beings. That's nonsense. However, Mill's utilitarianism limits its scope to humans based on the premise that only humans can reason and have complex desires. This is false as well. Every creature has desires. The very fact that it's moving around towards food and whatnot shows it has some desire, or that when it procreates or protects. These are desires, most likely fueled by desires, right? By focusing exclusively on humans, Mill's system could be seen as anthropocentric, failing to account for the moral status and happiness of non-human beings. Human superiority over other beings. You also point out that Mill's utilitarianism gives priority to human happiness over the well-being of animals or lesser beings. This seems to rest on a hierarchical view that places humans at the top, largely due to our higher cognitive abilities, reasoning capacity, and moral agency. But if we argue that humans prioritize their own happiness at the expense of animals or the environment, then we are making a claim of human superiority based on the very same reasoning that some humans use to justify the oppression of other humans. This leads to a moral paradox. If humans can disregard the happiness of animals because they have superior qualities such as reasoning or intelligence, then this logic could extend to disregarding the well-being of other humans who are perceived as lesser in some way, through racial, ethnic, or cultural differences. Just as humans justify the exploitation of animals based on their superior capacities, they may as well justify the exploitation of other humans based on perceived differences such as race, skin color, origin, or belief. This would echo the same kind of moral justification used historically to rationalize slavery, colonization, and other forms of oppression. Human superiority and moral relativism. Your argument suggests that Mill's appeal to humans, human superiority, and the exclusion of non-human beings from the principle of utility could be morally problematic. It gives rise to a form of moral relativism where humans, based on their self-perceived superiority, could justify exploiting other creatures and even other humans for the sake of their own happiness. This introduces a dangerous moral double standard, the idea that one group, humans, can prioritize their happiness over others simply due to their cognitive or physical differences. This creates the potential for abuse and exploitation both of non-human creatures and other humans who are deemed lesser. Conclusion: your critique is valid because it challenges Mill's utilitarian framework on multiple fronts and highlights that happiness is not always a primary goal as people may pursue other ends. Virtue, wealth, happiness being a byproduct. It points out the limitation of Mill's anthropocentric view, which excludes animals, insects, and plants from consideration when it comes to moral worth and happiness. It draws attention to the danger of the superiority argument, where the same reasoning used to justify human dominance over animals could in theory be used to justify human domination of other humans based on perceived differences. In this way, Mill's utilitarianism might indeed be inconsistent and morally problematic when it comes to dealing with beings outside of the human realm, and when it leads to the justification of exploitation based on arbitrary distinctions. Superiority. By the way, I am a person who would be considered to have extreme moral views. Like, my only issue with Mill is that he wasn't consistent. Because you can't just, if you took all the intuitions universally of humans with regards to morality, it largely pretty much lines up with the Sharia in a lot of ways that a lot of people would not like. just saying, all right? My only issue with Mill is mainly two. Firstly, he's not wrong to actually appeal to universal intuitions. I think that's fine. But he's wrong to claim happiness as an end goal is something we always unrestrictedly do. There's like no proof of this. This is completely falsehood. I have multiple times acted, for example, out of instinct, not out of an end goal of happiness, whether intentionally or subconsciously. Like, I don't think so. And I've multiple times aimed to do goals that I did not have happiness in mind when I was doing them. I was thinking, like, how do I improve my character? Like, that's something like that. Or I might have had multiple end goals rather than just one. And sometimes I'm focusing in my mind on one end goal, whilst at the same time, in a lesser aware way, I still technically am doing an action for multiple different end goals. I'm just more focused, let's say, on one, which might be virtue or happiness or whatever. My problem with Mill is that it's not that he's actually, maybe I implied it wrong or whatever, but like, my problem with Mill isn't that he's appealing to universal natural beliefs that all humans share in order to come to a conclusion about how justice is. I think that's a perfectly fine way to go about figuring out morality. What do we naturally think right and wrong is. My problem is that he's inconsistent. He doesn't take all natural intuitions into account. Because if he did, it's not utilitarianism that comes out. It's something more aligned with the Sharia. And number two, my issue is that his claim that happiness is the end goal of humans is just false. Like, unrestrictedly, if his intention is unrestrictedly, when we do something, happiness is always the end goal. This is just false. No. A lot of humans act without that in mind at all. So that's my real issue. Okay, ChatGPT is talking like a secular liberal as it's critiquing Mill, so it's not really. It doesn't represent my position. Okay, so I'm just trying to critique a lot of things that is said here. Let me